Hey! Hey there! Today I'm going to be showing you guys my build for Nell. You probably already know that I was one of the few lucky ones who got the opportunity to try the first part of Season 3. That means I get to test Nell ahead of time. Once I've taken a closer look at Nell, she's actually a lot more complicated compared to what we got from the public demo. She's also probably gonna be one of my main descendants once the actual Season 3 drops. Upon testing Nell, I've been able to get a closer look at her abilities and its nuances, and I will gladly share everything I know and tests I did to you guys. First, let's talk about her abilities. Her passive ability affects her evasive scan. When activated, this marks enemies in front of Nell with a base of 8 targets up to a maximum of 13 at max range. When an enemy dies with the evasive mark, nearby enemies will be marked respecting the maximum targets. But upon testing this, it doesn't work, or this is a translation error. Because no matter how much I try to trigger this, it doesn't. If it was supposed to trigger, then this could have been a huge plus to quality of life. The next choice of words here might confuse people, but to sum it up, this basically just means that enemies with the mark will receive a 100% bonus skill power damage that deals stack RK damage. This bonus damage applies to your first ability and weapons. Weapon abilities does not trigger it. Even the new ricochet component doesn't trigger it. Only direct damage from the first ability and bullet damage. Nell's second and third ability also does not trigger it. Applying the mark works differently against Colossus because you have to be aiming at its weak point to apply the mark. Nell also has the same bonus when opening the encrypted box just like Enzo. Nell's first ability is Attack RK ability with 2 charges. Each cast will shoot out 3 long-range projectiles that deals 1 damage instance per projectile. However, if you use this ability against a marked enemy from your passive ability, each projectile will deal 3 damage instances. 1 from the projectile damage, 1 from the bonus AoE damage, and 1 from the evasive scan. This ability actually deals the highest damage possible over time because again this has 2 charges, has a very low cooldown, and the only condition is to hit marked enemies. The only downside of this is that this ability is limited when it comes to mobbing because of the small radius. This ability is extremely good against elites, bosses, and low-density contents with tough enemies. This ability also increases Nell's 4th ability duration when hitting marked enemies. Her second ability is a fusion ability that deals DOT damage per 500 milliseconds over 15 seconds. This also debuffs the enemies and reduces their movement speed while boosting our weak point damage additively for a total of 35%. You can also reactivate this ability to retrieve the ability. Doing so will remove the ground DOT damage and debuffs, but you recover 20% of your shield, 90% of the ability max cooldown, increases our movement speed by 40%, and yes, this includes sprint speed, and also deals a huge burst damage over the area. This ability, however, will not trigger the evasive scan bonus damage. But because of its area of effect, this is great for mobbing, especially on easier contents. Her third ability is also a fusion ability that is tied with her second ability. You will not be able to use the skill if you did not cast your second ability. What this does is when activated, it deals a slightly stronger burst damage than retrieving your second ability, while pulling enemies in the center of your second ability. If you do use this ability, you can no longer reactivate or retrieve your second ability and will go into a cooldown. Using your third one grants you buffs from retrieving your second skill, but the DOT damage and debuff stays. Evasive scan bonus damage also does not apply. But the fun part is, this actually applies the status Toad to the enemies which was not mentioned aside from the tag, which means Toad-related synergies will work like the 4-set Slayer component effect. Her fourth ability will grant Nell a buff that guarantees a 100% weak point hit rate no matter where you shoot the enemy at. This triggers every weak point synergy weapon modules like Real Life Fighter, Tenacious Hunter, Ultra Precision Strike, and more, essentially giving you 100% weak point hit rate. This also gives Nell and nearby allies 35% bonus to weak point damage multiplicatively. Hitting a marked enemy from your passive ability with Nell's first ability will increase the duration of her fourth skill as well as defeating the marked enemies. Her first Transcendent module that I will be talking about is the Restored Heart module. This modifies her second ability, and instead of dealing damage and debuffing enemies, you will now grant continuous shield recovery to you and your allies. You will also receive a massive damage reduction if you and your allies are at 100% shield. Reactivating this ability will reduce the max cooldown of this ability by 90% while also reducing your third ability max cooldown by 50%. What I meant by max is the cooldown from your tooltip. Example, I have 10-second cooldown and the 90% reduction is 9-second cooldown shaven off. Her third ability using this Transcendent module will now also recover you and your ally's shield, grants 30% movement speed bonus including sprint speed, and increases you and your ally's skill power ratio by 30%. The next Transcendent module is called Shattered Heart. This modifies Nell's first, second, fourth, and passive ability. For the passive ability, Nell will be receiving a 20% bonus crit rate to base. That's a total of 25% critical hit rate base. This also adds a new mechanic that adds a custom resource bar for Nell. This custom resource can be acquired by a 50% chance when hitting marked enemies with a critical hit from the first ability. The maximum resource bar you can get is 9. For the first ability, the Acquisition of Suspicion has been added. The projectile damage modifier was reduced by 70%, and the burst additional damage modifier was reduced by 50%. For the second ability, it's still exactly the same from the base second ability, except instead of recovering your shield, you are given 15% cooldown reduction buff additively, which means it's added to your other cooldown reduction modifiers. The fourth ability has been completely changed, and instead of buffing Nell for 100% weak point hit rate, this ability will now deal 1490.2% damage per shard for a total of 9. Hitting enemies with Ease of Mark will boost the damage by 100%. This is the only purpose for the custom resource, and you get the same amount of shards for the same amount of custom resource bar consumed. Now before I proceed with the builds, I would repeat myself and say that Nell is actually quite complicated with a lot of nuances. Different playstyles can stem from different players when using Nell, which is an amazing thing. But if you decide to follow my builds, I did the builds with math, but I won't bore you with it. I will pop random math images in front of you though to prove a point and to support the build. So make sure to listen very carefully to the explanations. Even if you don't follow the builds, you can tinker them yourselves given the information I provided. With that, let's talk about my crit mobbing build. We will be using the Shattered Heart Transcendent module here for that 20% bonus crit rate to base. With Blue Beetle, Arcade Tuning, Better Insight, and Frontlines without emergency measures, you will be able to achieve 97% critical hit rate assuming Blue Beetle buff is up. Using Blue Beetle will give you some quality of life because you can replace emergency measures for HP in difficult contents or other modules that suits your playstyle. But with this particular build, we will be using Peacemaker and not the Blue Beetle, simply because just like Valve's crit build, Peacemaker will give you the better overall DPS due to the bonus to power ratio even when you're not at 100% crit rate. You can calculate this yourself and it will show you that I'm right. For easier contents like Sigma Sector and 400%, we can keep emergency measures for more damage. Now you might think, won't I have mana problems using Slayer set and having no mana modules? That's where the complication arises. I said before that Nell's third ability puts enemies in a Toad status. This will actually trigger Slayer's mana and custom resource recovery. This will solve our mana quality of life as well as gaining custom resource for our fourth ability burst damage. Not only that, we are also using the new trigger module called Power Beyond. When casting an ability tagged with global or ground DOT, gives us a stack of Void Recharge. At max stacks, this creates a zone that reduces attack damage of the enemies and inflicts yet another Toad status. This trigger module also increases our skill power ratio for a total of 15% additively. Now when testing this, the skill power wasn't actually applying to the damage. But I've already reported this to the developers and was acknowledged that this was not intended and it was supposed to apply to the skill damage. There are also certain abilities that are not tagged with ground or global DOT that gives us the stacks like Nell's first ability. This was not intended. They did ensure me that they'll fix this before season launches and let's hope for that. Besides, there's no other trigger module that synergizes with Nell's second ability. And yes, we will be utilizing Nell's second ability for mobbing because of its huge radius. Using the Power Beyond trigger module will ensure the recovery of our mana and custom resource, and because of this, we no longer need any mana modules. We are using Fusion Master here because this modifies our second ability's overall damage and overall tick damage. But Power Increase will boost our damage across all skills. I am not going for focus on non-attribute here because I am utilizing the bonus 15% cooldown reduction from the second ability right here. Not only that, I am also utilizing the bonus on movement speed. The rotation for this is quite simple. Cast second ability, then retrieve before using any other abilities. Do this vice versa, just like how you use the cooldown reduction from multi-talented. With the 15% cooldown reduction, We can get away with not using cooldown reduction on arcade tuning and going Fusion Master instead of focus on non-attribute. This will net us a lot more damage. With 7% cooldown reduction from Reactor, we can easily achieve 90% cooldown reduction. But you can still go with focus on non-attribute and cooldown on arcade tuning if you don't want to utilize the 15% cooldown reduction from the second ability. Now you might argue that Enlightened Mage will deal the higher damage. Yes, if you're talking about damage numbers, but just by a tiny amount. The reason for this is because we are using Peacemaker. If you understand how the relationship of power ratios work in this game, essentially you have to balance out the bonuses. You get more value by increasing the lowest power ratio. And since Peacemaker boosts our non-attribute power ratio, the value from Enlightened Mage goes lower, and the value for Fusion power ratio and base power ratio goes higher. This is why the damage difference between Slayer and Enlightened Mage is only by about 3.3%. Going Enlightened Mage requires you to stack your bonuses to 3 before acquiring the damage bonus, so the calculation for this was averaged against the build-up time. With this knowledge and how I built this build, going Slayer set just makes more sense. And if you decide to use Secret Garden and stack buffs through first ability and use Enlightened Mage, the damage difference is only 31,000. Very minimal for a huge sacrifice in quality of life. One main reason why Peacemaker is the best choice for a stat stick weapon is because the weapon itself is very powerful. With the new buffs to the weapon, and because we are utilizing Nell's fusion abilities, we can stack our buffs to 5 and achieve Peacemaker's ability conditions. This will allow us to switch between abilities and Peacemaker to burst bosses, elites, and even Colossus. Just remember that if the weapon is currently at 5 stacks, fire rate does not affect this weapon until the entire magazine count has been consumed. It will stay at 545 fire rate until that happens. This is why we're not going with fire rate. You can go fire rate if you still want to shoot the weapon outside the ability bonus. Using amplification control instead of magazine maximize range is enough because you get to max out your range when your quantum domain reaches 13 stacks. We are not using defense neutralization here because it does not boost our non-attribute damage at all. Defense and non-attribute is completely different from one another. Now, even if we're just using the fusion abilities, it doesn't mean we don't use our first and fourth ability. Both abilities will still deal absurd amount of damage. Using Tech Reactor and Tech Modules for your first and fourth skill will only matter if you're in contents like Void Erosion Purge. Fusion build is more for mobbing. The next build is just a non-crit version of the crit build. The crit build will still deal more damage, but non-crit build allows for more quality of life modules. You can either use 2 HP modules, skill cost reduction, MP collector, decimator, or even dangerous ambush for the free slot you have. We will now be using cooldown modules and cooldown on arcade tuning because we no longer have the 15% cooldown reduction from the second ability. This build will also boost our weapon damage because of the 100% weak point hit rate from our fourth ability. Use the same Peacemaker build from the crit build. In the showcase later, I will be using the Bravery set for the non-crit build to show that the component set is quite viable for Nell as well. Arcade tuning again because we're using cooldown will look slightly different from crit arcade tuning, but still we are not using defense neutralization. The next build is the Void Erosion build. This is just a crit mobbing build, but we remove emergency measures for 1 HP module, and instead of building into fusion, we're building into tech. The reason why is because Nell's first ability deals the highest possible damage when hitting a marked enemy. Void Erosion Purge is not a dense content, so using first ability even when it has a low radius is extremely fine. Going fusion build here will not be optimal for its lack in damage and animations. Slayer component will also be extremely valuable here for the custom resource and mana recovery. Going Slayer will give you better damage boost than Enlightened Mage. As explained earlier, you have to balance the relationship of power boost ratios. Void Erosion Purge has a hidden bonus to elemental power ratio, and this includes non-attribute. This is why going focus on non-attribute or even Enlightened Mage is inferior than going with Slayer or power increase. However, we're going with Tech Master to boost our passive damage even more because aside from using our abilities, we are also using weapons. Specifically a burst built blast dagger and of course the Malevolent. As demonstrated earlier, weapon bullet damage also triggers the bonus damage from your passive ability. You will see how we play Nell in Void Erosion Purge in the showcase later. But basically, You use your second ability for the cooldown and movement buff and weak point damage boost. Use your evasive scan and use your first ability and you'll be melting the enemies together with your weapon. This will also recover your custom resource so you can use your fourth ability against the cluster of elites and basically one-shots all of them. Inversion and arcade tuning is the same, except we now use defense neutralization not for our abilities, but this is to boost weapon damage. Take note that your passive ability won't apply defense neutralization. The next build is the pure gunner build. We will not be caring too much about skill power here, but we will be utilizing our passive, second, and fourth ability. Basically, the idea is to debuff the enemies with your second ability. You can reactivate your second ability to gain the buffs, or use third ability for crowd control. Fourth ability will be your biggest bonus to damage because you will receive a 100% weak point hit rate. With this, the idea is to increase our duration to boost quality of life. We can also match the duration with cooldown reduction for our second ability and spread the debuff across multiple areas. For the trigger module, we will be using the Hyper Hollow points. Basically, this increases your weak point damage every time you hit a non-weak point for a maximum of 240%. This can easily be achieved because your weapons have a high fire rate. Basically, extremely useful against bosses, elites, and colossus. Empty one magazine count before activating your fourth ability. When hitting a weak point, you will consume 2 stacks which lowers the weak point damage bonus per stack, but it also recovers your HP. There are no other mutant style that synergizes with Nell's gunner build that's more worth than this. Except if they add more during launch. We can use 2-piece ascending set and 2-piece shell crusher against colossus, but for mobbing, you can use the new ballistic tracker set. This build is only as good as the weapon you use. And for that, we will use the Malevolent from the Void Erosion build, a general last dagger specifically for Nell, and the Exterminator. For the Exterminator, I have a separate video about it. It has its own explanation, so watch the video instead because it'll only make this one longer if I include it. Link in the description below. The last dagger build will actually deal the highest possible DPS. Perforator, Gregs, Alpine Cavalry won't be able to match the DPS of this build. However, you'll be required to shoot at the close range for maximum damage. You can also use Greg's Reverse Fate instead of the Malevolent, and this can be good against clustered enemies. The same Greg's build can also be used against Wall Crusher, but replace Spray and Pray with Analysis Master to reduce the crit resistance of Wall Crusher. Trust me, in a team of 8, this is very valuable. With that, you may also use a movement weapon. If so, just use the Peacemaker build I have for the crit build. For arcade tuning, going defense neutralization will still give you the better DPS, and you can apply this easily by using her second ability. Nell for sure will be one of my main Descendants. Her playstyle is fun enough, plus her abilities look really good. I had a really fun time figuring out Nell, testing what works and doing the math. There might be changes when the actual Season 3 drops, but I doubt that it's something big. It'll probably only be some number changes. If so, check the pinned comments for adjustments. That's it for this one, guys. Make sure to check out my video about my whole experience playing the private demo. It includes Axion Planes, new quality of life, trigger modules, skins, and a lot more. For now, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
완료. 확실하게.